Who wrote the four gospel accounts of Jesus, and why did they sometimes seem so different? In this episode of the Red Letter Basics podcast, we explore the fascinating world of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the unique perspective each brings to the story of Jesus. You'll discover why the Gospels aren't just biographies, but powerful theological portraits meant to help us see Jesus as the Messiah, Savior, and the Son of God. We will unpack the heart and style of each Gospel writer: Matthew, the tax collector; Mark, the fast-paced storyteller; Luke, the detail-loving doctor; and John, the beloved disciple who wants everyone to believe in Jesus. We'll also explore why the differences don't contradict, but actually give us a fuller, richer view of who Jesus is. And finally, we'll talk about how these four accounts came to be part of the New Testament while others didn't. I'm your host, Austin Woodruff, and I get to interview from our theological team, Matthew Tingblad and Nick Alsop, as we dig into the four gospel accounts and why they matter more than ever. So Matthew and Nick, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Matthew, what are you up to these days? You've written a book, you have a YouTube channel, you're going to school. What's going on?
Yeah, well,
I just said everything.
am I? Or are you?
Okay, yeah. Yeah. What are you studying?
So I'm okay.
Or I'll just shut up. How about you talk?
Yeah. Okay. I have a way of presenting myself, Austin.
Okay.
I'm a speaker and author with Josh McDowell Ministries. So I go around doing apologetics, helping people understand why we can believe that Christianity is true. I wrote a book. It's called Why Did God Do That? It goes through Bible difficulties. I have a YouTube channel talking about a lot of the stuff that I do. And I have an MDiv from Talbot School of Theology. And I'm working on a second master's from Talbot in philosophy.
Wow, that's quite a resume there. That's quick. Man, thank you. Nick, what about you? What's going on in your life? I'll talk less this time.
I am married. I have two children. My oldest is unmarried, and she works as an audiologist in the DFW area. My daughter, Emily, is married and works for a ministry with Gene Getz, who's a very old fellow, 94 years old. Anyway, and I've been married since 1989. I work at Josh McDowell with Matt, and I am working as the curriculum coordinator. So I do a lot of work with Josh's materials. He's written 150 books, and so I got lots of material to work with. And I basically am trying to help people go beyond just getting the book in their hand to where they can use it to teach and to use it to further the ministry.
That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about your education, where you come from.
So, right, I've got 4 degrees.
Okay.
I have 2 from University of Maryland, where I studied to become a Bible translator. I studied at University of Texas, Arlington, in order to be a Bible translator. And then I took a degree at Dallas Seminary, THM. So,
right. You are quite the linguist.
Yes.
Yeah, and you also trained with Wycliffe a bit.
Yes, I have. Yeah, that was my UTA.
Yeah, and you were kind of a editor, theological copy editor, or something like that with
Family Life.
Family Life.
Yeah, I worked at Family Life from year 2000 to 2018 when I joined JMM.
Man, well, thank you both for being here. Today, we're going to be talking about the gospel accounts and their authorship. What are the gospel accounts and who wrote them? Let's start there.
Well, first, I want to say God is the author.
Okay.
And the Gospels are written by 4 different fellows.
Okay. So who are these? What are the gospel accounts?
Yeah. Well, the gospel accounts are the first 4 books of the New Testament, which is the second half of the Bible, or the Jesus and then on forward part of the Bible.
Hey.
Shouldn't call it second half because it actually starts like 3/4 way into the scriptures. But anyway, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay. So the gospel accounts.
Yes, the gospel of
Matthew.
Matthew, the gospel of Mark, the gospel of Luke, the gospel of John.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
all 4 of them are grouped together because all 4 of them talk about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
We just want to say that Matthew here is not one of the gospel writers.
Okay. Yeah.
Not one of the gospel. Yeah.
It was a fellow about 2,000 years ago.
Okay. So they're written 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
By these 4 people.
They were written probably within the first 100 years after Jesus lived.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Who are these individuals? So who is Matthew? Who is Mark? Who is Luke? And who is John? Maybe let's just take them one at a time. Who is Matthew?
Matthew would have been one of the 12 disciples that was chosen by Jesus to be a follower and to live. He lived with them for 3 years until he was killed crucified.
And
very interesting pick for the first gospel too, because Matthew was known as a tax collector, which in that time, if you were a tax collector, then that means you basically betrayed your own people, the Jews, in order to like cheat them out of money so that you can become rich and also like hold this job for the Roman government, and the Romans were oppressing the Jews.
right.
Yes.
So the fact that Jesus picked out Matthew to present his story is quite remarkable.
Right.
And it a lot of people,
Very remarkable.
yeah, very remarkable.
True.
And it speaks to the authenticity of Matthew too.
Yeah.
Because if somebody were just making up a story of Jesus and wanted to attach like a good name to it, they would not attach Matthew.
Right.
Mm.
Right. He's a very unlikely candidate who would not be very appealing, especially to a Jewish audience.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So like John makes sense. And we'll talk about him a little later.
Yeah.
So
So Matthew, the gospel writer, he's one of the 12 disciples, but he was an eyewitness.
Yes.
And I have in the appendix. So for everyone who's new to this podcast and to Red Letter Basics, one of the resources that we produce is this book, Red Letter Basics, What Does Jesus Say? And the theological team, among many projects, has helped us comb through this book and really get critical about what is in here. And so the first section of the book covers 135 subjects that help us study the Bible by starting with the words of Jesus. And then in the back are these essential appendix-style resources, short little one-page articles. One of them is about the gospel writers. And in here we have a note that shows us that Matthew was also called Levi. And some of the other things that you were just talking about, how he was rejected by his community. And as we talk about Matthew, let's look at his audience and maybe some of the other things. Let's put the book of Matthew in context a little bit. So what else is important? What else is important to consider as we read the book of Matthew and look at the words of Jesus and study the gospel and the life and ministry of Jesus? What else is important as we read?
As you mentioned here in the appendix, you say he often refers to the Old Testament and tends to present Jesus as king. It's evident when you read the gospel that there is an audience. It is being written to a particular, not a specific people, but a general audience. And in Matthew's case, often he's referring to the Jewish people. He's trying to help the Jewish people see Jesus as their Messiah, as their king. He wants them to recognize that. And he does that in various ways. And one of them is he uses Old Testament prophecies and different quotations in order to point out to these Jewish people, hey, Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah, I think this was the last episode we did where we talked about like the grand narrative of Scripture.
Right, yeah.
And one of the things I pointed out then was that there are lots of prophecies in the Old Testament that look forward to Jesus. Matthew, more than the other four Gospels, brings that out.
Right.
If you read through Matthew, you'll see frequently he's like, thus it was fulfilled, thus Jesus fulfilled. And so he does look to the Old Testament a lot, to your point, because he knows that Jews are paying attention to the Old Testament. And Matthew is saying, look here, this is fulfilled in Jesus.
That's right.
So Matthew, in the writing style, we can conclude that he's being very intentional about how he writes and what he's writing. Mm-hmm. That's super important to remember. Thanks. So, Mark, who is Mark? And before we move on to Mark, is there anything else with Matthew that you guys think is important to keep in mind and to kind of put the book in context?
He's got a good name.
Well, okay. Okay. Mr. Matthew Tingblad.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Mark, what's going on here? Matthew is a pretty long book, and then Mark shows up, and it's really short. Who is he, and what's going on in his gospel account?
One of the things you read in Mark is immediately,
Yeah.
or as soon as. I don't know. There are many ways, but he seems to have a real quick pace to what he's doing, what he talks about. So you're reading it, and suddenly, whoop, another scene, whoop, So, Mark is not meant to be an actual disciple of Jesus, but he is someone who is associated with the apostles.
So he was not an apostle of Jesus.
No, not directly.
Right. So, for a long time, I, as a Christian, just kind of assumed that the gospel accounts were eyewitnesses, right? I mean, duh. But that's not the case.
Not in Mark's case.
Not in Mark's case. There's some speculation that a certain character, in the Gospels was Mark. I'm not going to get into details.
Yeah, there's that moment when you're talking about when Jesus was arrested.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mark's account, he's the only account of the gospel accounts that shows this detail. And that there was this little boy named John Mark or something who was seized by one of the Roman soldiers, and the soldier had grabbed his cloak, and then this boy kind of took his cloak off and ran away naked.
That's right. It's a fascinating little detail.
And
it goes to the fact that, if you're writing a gospel about Jesus, why would you include a detail that is so
embarrassing?
Right. So it goes to the authenticity of it.
Right.
I feel like, so if that was Mark,
right.
I feel kind of bad because clearly,
if it's the same Mark,
if that was Mark,
right.
is the name Mark even mentioned in that story, or is it just a guy?
No.
It's not.
So
it's just
we don't even know who it is.
Yeah, it doesn't say his name.
It is a peculiar thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to dwell on this too much.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because if that was Mark, I feel kind of bad for him because clearly Mark is like, I want to be in this story somehow. And this was the best story that you could come up with, like running out naked. Maybe that's why he doesn't identify the person.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I want to say I'm in there without saying who I am in that story.
Well, yeah. We could talk about John and the way he refers to himself. But.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, we will. We'll get to that. So, one of the other things that we made sure to have written in here, so he's not an actual of the 12 apostles, right? But he is an associate of the apostle Peter and of Paul, and of Barnabas, which you hinted at for a second. So maybe give us a little bit more on what's going on there.
Well, if we go on to another book in the New Testament, we talk about Acts.
Yeah.
And in Acts, you'll notice that Mark is involved there. And he's also involved in a bit of an embarrassing situation, too. But
yes.
Mark. Yeah. But he's apparently a growing character because, later on, anyway, he refers to in many places in the New Testament. So
we know that he had that association because of other scriptures.
Correct.
Okay.
And then also we I can't remember how sure we are, but I think it's pretty definite that we think that Peter was his source.
Yes.
For the gospel narrative.
I've heard that.
And so that I think gives us confidence that what he's writing is maybe not truly eyewitness, but it's almost like it's done by an eyewitness and he's retelling that story.
Okay, so what you're saying is there's in this idea that possibly some people call it Peter's gospel,
right?
That Mark was writing, and then over tradition or whatever, it's been remembered as Mark's gospel account since he wrote. Is that kind of what you're saying? But we're not sure of it. It's just kind of a conversation.
Well, authorship, I would still call it Mark's gospel, but I think the source for the narrative is
interesting. Okay, that's a good way to put it, maybe.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting that so much of Peter's story shows up in Mark.
Yeah.
Which is one of the clues too. But also the church tradition holds that, Mark was an associate of Peter. It holds that Mark, of course, wrote this gospel. And so, there's a lot going for it there. But one thing too, what you pointed out, that Mark likes to use the word immediately a lot, and he kind of rushes through stories. Mark is the shortest of the four gospels. Mm-hmm. And so if anyone wants to set out to read an entire gospel in a single sitting, Mark is a good place to start.
That's a really good
reading through Mark.
If you got a couple hours.
It's still lengthy,
Mhm.
But, people do
Yeah.
it. People do it.
Yes.
So with Matthew, we talked a little bit about the intended audience that
Mhm.
most people believe it to be and what it seems like, as well as kind of how he um, uh, paints Jesus as in that account, right?
Right.
As king, as this Messiah, Old Testament prophecy fulfiller. What do we see in Mark as far as audience goes, and how Mark presents Jesus? What do we see happening here?
Yeah, Mark, it's, I wouldn't say it's quite as clear as with Matthew, but I think the audience is more of a Roman audience. Maybe some of the customs he's talking about, he doesn't really include as much detail that maybe Romans might understand. But then, so I think he's really talking more to a Roman audience,
Yeah.
people who are not familiar with the Jewish customs as much and those sort of things.
I've heard people say that Mark presents Jesus as a suffering servant too.
Yes.
In
Right.
fact, is that mentioned here in the
Yeah,
appendix?
that's one of the notes in the
Or
appendix
servant,
that,
yeah.
Mark tends to present Jesus as servant, which is a pretty common understanding if you're looking at that. And as we read the words of Jesus, it's helpful with these different gospel accounts. I mean, just in the first two accounts that we've talked about, Matthew and Mark, I mean, one is lengthy, very Jewish oriented. The other is short, to the point, Roman oriented. One, Jesus is presented as king. The other, he's presented as servant. I mean, are we even talking about the same guy here? Right?
No, it is very much the same thing. I mean, you can see all four of the Gospels include a lot of the different same stories that you get about Jesus. So it is talking.
Before we move on to the next two, now that we have two to compare, how do we navigate this? Of what you were just saying, of we have a lot of the same stories, but they seem to be different. I mean, there's different details. The chronology seems to be different. What are we talking about? What genre style, narrative style are the gospel accounts?
I think it's a very interesting study that's been done. Lots of people write about this issue. And the fact is that the Gospels are quite a unique kind of literature. Some people want to call it just a biography, and it's not really a biography.
At least not how we understand.
Right. I mean, yeah, and there are other people who write biographies in ancient literature, and it's much different than this. Others want to call it a spiritual, account. And yes, it is, but it also has a lot of factual information, so it's historical. Some people want to call it a historical narrative, but there's other genres embedded in it that don't make it exactly, so it's quite a unique kind of piece of literature, but it has all those kind of facets to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely a historical element. They're telling about the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But they place a lot of priority on theology and theological concerns, and that affects how they write their history. So whereas us, when we write history, we're very interested in chronology. We're interested in even coverage, reading the Gospels. There's hardly anything in any of the Gospels about Jesus's teenage years. And a lot of people read that and they're like, what the heck? Why would Jesus skip over that? Well, it's because they have theological concerns that are most present in the adult life of Jesus as he's teaching and ministering to others.
Right.
Yeah.
So from what I hear both of you saying, so what you were saying is there's a lot of facets going on into the literary style and structure of the gospel accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, the gospel writers, we're like, oh, I need to write a biography now of Jesus.
That's right.
They're not like, oh, I need to make a historical account. What you're saying is, no, they're writing this to make a theological point.
Mm-hmm.
What is that point? What's the
That
point?
Jesus is God.
We could go back to what we even discussed earlier, Matthew presenting Jesus as Messiah, King, Mark presenting him as servant. So these are the theological things that are informing how they write their historical narratives of Jesus.
So we have these accounts, historical accounts, spiritual accounts, biographical accounts, in a multifaceted literary style that is intended by each writer, inspired by the Spirit, to make a theological point that Jesus is the Savior of our sins. He is God. He's the fulfillment all these different facets of who Jesus is.
Amen.
Yeah, and of course, some stories, like you can't skip over, no matter what you want to emphasize, you can't skip over the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Right.
And other stories like that. So that's in all four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah, not only to that point, but if you look at the length of the Gospels, the major portion of their Gospel is going to be about that last
Yeah.
week. And so it's like, it's disproportionate almost
Yes.
in the Gospel, but so that's another point to your theological, they're going to just major on that.
And it's not even that they're different, although in one sense they are, but they're different perspectives, not a different truth. It's same truth, different perspective, different facet in how to communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ, his purpose, who he is, and how we can have a relationship with him.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, sorry, were you?
I was just going to bring in, you've heard often that when you have different people writing about the same thing, it's like different people looking at an elephant from different perspectives, and one thinks it's a trunk, or one thinks it's a tree, and one thinks it's a stick.
Yeah.
But, in some fashion, that's true for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're looking at the same things, seeing the same things happen, but they have their own theological input, their own kind of matter of how they want to look at it. So they give you different details to highlight things differently.
Oh, this is so amazing. There is.
We haven't even
so
gotten
much
like Luke and John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the important piece is it's the same elephant, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Some
I'm
people-
sorry.
Some people use that illustration.
I know
Awesome
exactly.
I'm just saying, because I've heard people use that illustration to be like, oh, we all just have our own different feelings and things.
I know, right?
And truth
Like,
is relative.
good point.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
but the illustration works if you bring that in too.
Yes.
And I could also look at, say there's like a crime scene and
Yes,
4 or
right.
5 witnesses.
Oh, and there definitely was a crime scene in the gospel.
Yeah. And
Oh my God.
yeah, and just think modern times, like people are going to interview the different witnesses.
Right.
And they're not going to say everything in the same kind of way.
And a detective's job is to put it together.
Yeah.
And a judge sees the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just
Well done.
expected that you're going to have stories told from different perspectives because people come at their stories from different perspectives.
Matthew, if you would, maybe 60 seconds or 120 seconds, maybe 100 seconds. Dealer's choice. If
Okay.
someone is struggling with this area, this conversation, and the differences in the gospel, maybe skeptical about the authenticity of the gospel accounts and who Jesus is, I mean, this is what you do. What would you say to them?
Well, part of what I would have is what I've already shared a little bit. It's like, hey, these are different perspectives, but they're not different stories. And some people, that might not satisfy them because they read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they see differences that they don't even think work together.
Right.
Like for instance, Matthew's account talks about this centurion who comes to plead for the healing of like a paralyzed servant. And Luke mentions 2 servants sent by the centurion or this Roman guard to plead. So is it the centurion or is it the 2 servants? It appears to be a contradiction. And I can understand where people get kind of tripped up on that. But one of the things too to remember is that the gospel writers were not trying to give specific scientific details of the stories like what we expect today when we listen to history. It could simply be, to pull from this example, that the centurion by Matthew was just his way of abbreviating like the more accurate details, that it was these 2 servants that were sent by the centurion. Somebody sent in the name of somebody else, and you can just use the name of that person.
Right.
And we can go on looking at other differences in Scripture and show, okay, it's not as rigid as we think it is.
Yeah.
One person mentions, so many people at the tomb. Someone else mentions other people at the tomb. Nobody says it was this exact number. They're just paying attention to the different people who were at this event.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and I think like a lot of people today, and I'll end with this. It's like, it feels like we're kind of word playing around, word verbal gymnastics and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, like, it's just, they're not as specific on these details in as we expect them to be.
Right.
And if we're going to read the scriptures, if we're going to read the gospels, we should read them as they were intended to be heard,
Right.
not according to our own frame of how we expect people to write in that time.
Right. So they are writing as a first century author, not as a 20th century author. And we need to keep that in mind when we read the Gospels.
It's easy to get caught up on the nuances and the details from our perspective. And it's hard to sometimes kind of step back and be like, hey, what's the point here?
Mm-hmm.
What is this person trying to write down?
Make it for itself. Write it, write it. I mean, read it because they're writing to tell you something, not to be picked apart.
Yeah. So let's move on to the other two gospel accounts. So Matthew and Mark, two very different from each other. One is an apostle of the 12 disciples. Another was an associate of the apostles. A lot of differences there. The last two gospel accounts are Luke and John.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put Luke in context. Who is he, and what's going on with his gospel account?
Luke is quite an interesting character. First of all, he was, I guess he knew Jesus. I guess I don't know that he knew him when he was alive, but he was obviously a believer in Jesus. But he knew Paul, and he traveled with Paul. You see his name throughout Acts. And it's quite fascinating to study what he did. So he actually wrote two books of the Bible. He wrote Luke and Acts. And if you put those two books together, he's written about a third of the New Testament.
So who is he intending to write to? Like, what's his audience?
Well, his audience was a guy named Theophilus, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
Theophilus. Yeah.
Theophilus.
Which in Greek means friend of God.
Yeah.
So it could be that this Theophilus, in Luke's opening statement, he says to Theophilus, basically, "Dear Theophilus, here is my gospel account." Right.
Well, and he goes into detail. He says that he checks all his sources.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost sounds like he's a modern writer, trying to check and make sure everything's accurate.
Yeah.
So for someone who actually might be a little skeptical about the details and stuff, maybe start with Luke. I mean, he seems to be concerned about some of this.
I think so. I think, generally speaking, when you notice an apparent difference or contradiction between a story told by Luke and the same story told by somebody else like Matthew, I tend to prioritize Luke for accuracy of details, and Matthew or
not
others,
of truth necessarily.
Yeah,
of these little
details. And Matthew or others maybe like abbreviating this or choosing to rearrange things in a certain way, which is fine, again, in that style of writing. But Luke says explicitly at the beginning, I'm writing to give an orderly account of what really happened.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Luke is trying to be more specific and detailed and to press into that more than the others.
Yes.
Interesting. So we have this guy traveling with an apostle, the Apostle Paul. He's writing this orderly account to either a person or a people group of Theophilus, right? People of God, or a person's name, which it was also a name. What else with his audience might be important? Is there anything else that would help us put in context?
Well, I might add that it's known that Luke was a physician. Now, we don't take him to be a medical doctor like we have today. Medical practice back then was totally different than we have today. But it is actually helps you to understand. I mean, a physician still was someone who had to study and they have to learn details. And so he had some intellect. He was able to process details. And like Matt said, I mean, he had all his facts checked. He went about trying to really verify things. I mean, we can tell that from two of the Gospels tell us about the infant narrative of Jesus. So we have Matthew and we have Luke, and Luke goes into great details about that part of
genealogies in Matthew, and Luke also has genealogies.
That's right. Yeah, they tell them from different perspectives again, but they're of the same person and the same reason. So yeah, I think him being a physician, having some intellect is an important.
See a lot of details. I've seen studies of people who have looked at the details Luke has, and because he's so well ordered and detailed that you can confirm a lot of what Luke says by looking at archaeology and history and stuff like that. Like he mentions 11 historical leaders at the beginning that can be confirmed by archaeology or other sources, things like that.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Another fun fact on Luke. This is my party trick. This is where I feel like I have, I know you guys.
So on.
Luke also, out of all the gospel accounts, has the most female perspectives
Yes.
out of all the other gospel accounts.
Right.
And so the idea is that he has actually, when he's trying to make an orderly account, potentially as he's traveling with Paul, he's gathering data, gathering testimony from all these people, and women included, men included, everyone who has something to say about the life and account of Jesus. He's gathering this information, and he includes a lot of Mary's testimony and Martha's, and a lot of the other women who traveled with Jesus were most likely and possibly still around, and maybe senior at the time, but still around, that he could have sat and talked with and heard the stories.
Yeah. Luke has a lot of like encounter with Jesus stories in general. There's tons of stories in the Gospel of Luke where we see Jesus interacting with some person.
Right.
Lots of stories where Jesus is teaching too. And so some people say, Luke presents Jesus as teacher.
Yes.
And I think also as a kind of like personal encounter character, like Jesus meets us kind of person too. We see that a lot in Luke.
Wow. So in Matthew, we have Jesus as King, Messiah, prophecy fulfiller. In Mark, he's this servant, a suffering servant, right? And now in Luke, we see Jesus painted as this teacher who finds you and knows you and helps give you understanding. I mean, it's so amazing. We can read these different accounts and see Jesus in the text from all these different perspectives. It's so amazing that we
It
get to
makes
do
him
that.
very rich character.
Man, yeah, right. Yeah, we're rich as 1,000 cattle on a hill.
Yes.
So anything else on Luke? And then we'll move on to John.
We could comment on Matthew, Mark, Luke, like together.
Yeah.
Before we move to John.
Okay. What are you
talking
about?
What is this?
Yeah.
Some mystical.
So before we transition to John, it's worth noting that Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a lot of similarities that John does not have. This, there's similarities and differences across all of them, but the similarities tend to be grouped between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so a lot of people will refer to these first three books as the synoptic gospels.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of, they're so similar in some ways that a lot of people talk about, okay, which came first? Because it seems like somebody's borrowing from other people. And the most common view is that Mark wrote first. He's the earliest, and Matthew and Luke were borrowing from Mark and then adding some of their own details to that as well. And of course, their own eyewitness experiences, or, Matthew eyewitness, Luke speaking from Paul and all that. So it's just a very interesting thing. And so when you hear the word synoptics, it's referring to Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
So that explains why Luke, being the author of Luke and of Acts, or writer, not author, God's the
Good point.
Luke and Acts, why don't they just go side by side in terms of the print order and the structure of how it's been ordered? Well, it's because the synoptic gospels, remember, it's kind of like a library, and so we have the synoptic section of the shelf, and then we have John, who just kind of is like, wait a minute,
I'm in.
let you in. So, and we'll get to that in a second. So, as we talk about John now, we'll see why they're so different from each other, the synoptics from John. And what's going on with John?
John is another of the disciples of Jesus. He is, if you read through the accounts, you'll start to see that even amongst the 12, there are 3 that Jesus has chosen to do certain things and to draw them in even further. So there's I'm going to say you're my 12 disciples, but you guys are even more special. So there's going to be certain things that happen in the Gospels that only James, John, and Peter are witness to.
And for everyone listening, we're also going to be doing a full episode on the 12 disciples.
Right.
And we'll hone in on that a little bit more. But it's important to know that this John, who wrote the gospel account of John, is the John of that inner 3. James, John, and Peter.
Yes, Peter, James, and John.
Yeah. That John is this John. That's what you're saying.
He's the author of the gospel.
Yeah, the writer of the gospel.
Yeah. Good point.
So, okay, so he was one of the original 12. And very specifically, this John is the John of that inner 3, Peter, James, and John, that Jesus pulled into a lot of these kind of
Special events.
Special events. Yeah. I don't know how else to describe it, but such as the transfiguration, the resurrection of this little girl who was sleeping apparently or just dead. He's like, nah, she's just sleeping. Look.
No.
I mean, like, okay, hold on.
We can talk about
Everyone knows that she's dead. Okay. They're mourning.
they're all mourning.
Those types of moments he brought John into. And so that's the writer of this account. So Matthew was a tax collector. Mark was an associate of the apostles, kind of like an apprentice maybe. Luke was a physician. What do we know about John?
He was a fisherman.
Fisherman. So
Yes.
how do we know this?
Well, at the beginning of the Gospels, we see Jesus choose his first 4 or 5 disciples, and they were fishermen. So we have John and James, I think, are brothers, right? Son of Zebedee,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so he told them, later on he's called Sons of Thunder. Yeah.
And that nickname that Jesus gives this John makes so much sense when we read his gospel account, because the literary style is so extra. Talk a little bit about the language that he uses throughout.
Well, John has his theological concerns like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Some things that he stresses is like how Jesus is a light who comes into the world.
In the beginning was the Word.
Yeah,
the Word was
and the
with
light.
God.
And he talks about life in Jesus. But what most people know John for is that he was the most explicit of all the gospel authors that Jesus is fully God.
Yeah.
God in flesh. And so we get this at the very beginning of the Gospel of John. Like in the beginning was a Word, and the Word was life, and the Word came and dwelt among us. So he's looking straight back to Genesis chapter 1 and retelling that, presenting Jesus as this in the beginning figure, and saying he came and lived among us. Yeah. And then there's these statements from Jesus that John records in his gospel. Like, if you've seen the Father, you've seen me. I and the Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am, which looks back to Exodus chapter 3, which again, just all these things that point to Jesus as God. And so whenever you hear people argue that, or whenever you hear like Christians try and show that Jesus was fully God, you can bet they're going to turn to the book of John as an important source in that study.
So John presents Jesus as the Son of God. Like, you can see all over his writing and his language that he uses that is displaying the deity, the fullness of Christ being God in flesh.
This is one of the ways that we can separate the synoptics from the Gospel of John. It's not like the others don't recognize or have evidence for Jesus' deity, but there just seems to be a real center focus of John being the Son of God.
Yeah. To be honest, I think I suspect that it was pretty obvious in that time that Jesus believed he was God. Yeah. That Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't feel like they needed to stress that so much in their narratives. Right. John, who wrote a little later, like people are starting to question things, he needed to push that harder again to remind his listeners of who Jesus really, truly knew and understood himself to be.
That's good. Who is he writing to, do we think? Like, to open up a letter in such a way, in the beginning was the Word, and who do we believe that John was most likely writing to?
I think John is a little tougher to know exactly.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean,
he doesn't have a specific audience that he's kind of...
It's so different in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think of John chapter 20 when he says, "These things are written so that you will know that Jesus is a Messiah, and that by believing you may have life in his name." And so it sounds like he's just trying to reach everyone.
You're right.
I suspect he's very broad, and also the fact that the language he uses is very simple. Yeah. People who learn Greek, one of the first books that they find themselves being able to read is the book of John. Right. And maybe that's just because John didn't have a very sophisticated vocabulary. But either way, he's very simple, and he seems to be talking about things that matter for everyone, like Jesus is God. Yeah. And he just wants the world to believe.
It's almost like in the 4 gospel accounts, we have one is very Jewish oriented. It's like, if you understand Jewish culture, like, or if you want to really understand the messianic role that Jesus plays, bro, Matthew's account is for you. Like, if you need to get to the point how do I relate to Jesus? Mark's account is there for you. He came as a servant. Luke, on the other hand, if you're pretty concerned with details, like he's pretty specific with a lot of stuff. He shows a lot of narratives in the life and ministry of Jesus, a lot of different perspectives from different people and encounters. And then John, it's like, it's just so passionate.
Yes.
He makes everything so simple, and he presents it in such a way. He's like, I just want you to know Jesus. Like, he was in the beginning. He has come to us. He's in the end. Like, he's everywhere, man.
I know
He died on the cross. Like, let's go.
I know a lot of Christians, or just new believers, if it's like, where do I start?
Yes.
Times they
Start with the words of Jesus.
start with the ones of Jesus. But of Matthew, Mark, and John, it seems like John often get priority because of some of the things he mentions are just so important. Like Jesus as God, and that being very clear is important in our time. And so John is a good place to start.
Yeah, as we read, so we touched on this a second ago, and now because we're talking about how passionate he is, and we talked about his nickname, Son of Thunder. We talked about kind of his role in the inner three of Jesus's disciples. Another name that we see for him in the gospel accounts that kind of show his passion is he is fully comfortable calling himself in these tests, in the account, the beloved.
Yeah,
He's
the
very
Jesus who
comfortable.
Yeah, the disciple who Jesus loved.
Right. It's not this kind of boastful thing.
Well, it's very much, it's almost like it's like he wants to be behind the scenes.
Yeah. Right.
Doesn't even want to name himself, which is interesting. And
it's a nickname that he's given himself, maybe, or a title for himself that is one of humility almost. Like, I know I'm beloved. Like, you don't need to know my name. Just know that I'm loved by Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the one. The other thing that I've been considering mentioning is the idea that in the Gospel of John, you see the I am statements.
Yeah.
Where Jesus says, I think there's 7 of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am the door.
I'm the way, the truth, and the life.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. I'm the vine. Yeah. And that's actually one of the subjects in here. The 7 I am statements is one of the 135 in here. So we have Mark. So Matthew, he wrote Matthew. Mark, he wrote Mark. Luke, he wrote Luke and Acts. John,
he wrote John and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, not to be confused with the Gospel of John, but the letters of John near the end of the New Testament.
And they're real short letters.
Very short.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, 2nd John, I think, is the shortest letter in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have chapters. It's just like,
it's just a couple paragraphs.
Yeah, one handful. Yeah. But he also did Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. So he did quite a bit.
So as a New Testament writer, let's so he wrote these 3 letters that can be found farther into the New Testament, where he's writing to.
He writes to different people.
So he's writing.
He addresses them to individuals.
Right, they're letters. Right, it's not an account like this genre. Right, so then Revelation. Right, is So he writes Revelation, and just give us a quick little what's that?
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, what even is?
Let me know when you figure that out.
Yeah.
Revelation is an apocryphal book, which means that it's full of rich illustrations and language, but it's describing.
I don't think you mean apocryphal. I think you mean apocalyptic.
Oh, apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Apocryphal is a direct meaning.
That's why we pay you the big bucks here.
Yeah, right.
Apocalyptic. Apocryphal. Thank you. Yeah. It's a very different thing.
It's apostolistic.
Yeah, right. It's written by an apostle.
Anyway, I don't even remember.
Sorry,
it's a prophetic book. That has
John had a vision.
Apocalyptic visions.
Apocalyptic visions. Yes, John had these visions from God about the return of Christ when He will return, and he's telling about this to us as listeners, so we can have a sense on what's going to take place when Jesus comes back.
Right.
But it's also a difficult book because it's apocalyptic, which means that as a genre, it's full of rich imagery and illustrations.
Exactly.
And so we have to be careful not to take things literally in that sense. We need to hear the illustrations as illustrations for some deeper meaning behind them.
So he wrote a number of different, what we understand as books throughout the New Testament. The gospel account of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, which are 3 letters written to people that should be read as a letter, and then he wrote this apocalyptic vision prophetic book, the Revelation, where God gave him a revelation of Jesus Christ and the new kingdom and all this.
Right.
So these are other things that he was a writer of. So how are we doing on time?
We're at about 50 minutes recording.
Okay, let's before we stop, we mentioned that we wanted to possibly talk about canonization if we had time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's leave everyone listening and watching with a quick little, what is canonization of Scripture? We don't need to go into it in depth because there's a lot going on to it. And I want to reference a video that you put out on the Gospel of Thomas, because there's a lot of books that...
Yeah, they want to play around with that.
Yeah.
Right. That are not in the Bible. The Protestant evangelical 66 books. What's going on here? Just give us something quick with this.
Sure. Real quick. We've talked about the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Surprise, surprise, there's other books out there that are like the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, and we could actually name quite a few more.
Mary even.
Yeah, Mary. And so people hear about all these Gospels and they're like, what the heck? Like, why did Christians do these 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but exclude these others? And the reason is simple. It's that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are just the best of them all. The most accurate. We have good reason to trust that the authors truly are who they said they are, whereas the Gospel of Thomas was probably not written by Thomas. The Gospel of Peter was probably not written by Peter. They were probably written quite a time later.
Right.
And so
there's not a lot of evidence to prove their authorship.
Yeah, and also the fact that they were written later, they're probably written after these people even lived, so we don't have eyewitnesses anymore. I mean, it's just... It makes sense, though, because Jesus was such a popular guy. People are going to be like, oh, I want to get in on this and write something and then slap on Peter,
Right.
And then like try and, get this thing out. But these books, the theology is different. There's just a lot of reasons not to include them. And so the church's decision to use Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and to not use these other ones, which came a lot later, was a good decision.
Right.
And they were very careful over
Where does the word canonization come from? Like, what's going on there?
Canon is a word, I think it's Greek. It means basically a reed or a measuring rod.
Yep.
So the canon is basically a list of the books that we include in the New Testament that came with authenticity.
Right.
And we're not selected. That's the whole idea of canonization. We should go into another podcast or something. But
it's not like they went around and was like eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Right.
Absolutely.
And there wasn't even a group that selected them.
Right.
It was actually God's Spirit living through those scriptures that caused them to rise up to be the scriptures that we use.
And to be preserved over
to
time.
be preserved.
Yeah.
And so when was the canonization kind of like officialized?
So people say it was a Council of Nicaea.
Yeah, that's kind of the tradition.
That's what people say. That in many ways, that's also just wrong more than one way, because it was like the 27 books of the New Testament. We're talking about the New Testament now.
Mm-hmm.
Those 27 books were talked about by a lot of people, Christian authors and writers in the early days. Some of them were speculating over certain books, but then
You're talking Council of Nicaea, we're first few hundred years.
Yeah. But
325.
we can go earlier and look.
That's what you're talking about now.
Yeah,
Yes.
but we go earlier. We look to certain authors who, like biblical church fathers, not biblical, but church fathers, who said, I think it's these books. So we're speculating and thinking over that, and But then we had the Synod of Hippo in 393.
Mm-hmm.
That's what first gave us, here's a group of people coming together. Here's what it is. 27 books of the New Testament. And then in 397, the Council of Carthage, where they affirmed the Synod of Hippo. And so like Nicaea is not even part of the picture, which is funny that it shows up so much. I mean, they probably talked about that too. I don't know everything they discussed. They were mostly focused on Jesus. That was Nicaea. But anyway, 393, 397. Where like people came together and said, let's make this official.
Right.
Now, people are like, oh my gosh, we didn't have the Bible until hundreds of years later after Jesus. Like in some ways, that's kind of like, oh my gosh. But in other ways,
They were just choosing what stays in the library and what doesn't.
yeah, like think about this. That means there were hundreds of years prior to these councils where Christians were like, these are the books.
Yes.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans. They were using all these books, and it was these councils that came together that just affirmed those things to be the case.
That's a really good point. So from what I'm hearing, the canonization of Scripture, specifically of the New Testament and even more of the gospel accounts, is canon, a measuring of writing as to what qualifies us to affirm the truth that God has already been preserving through his church.
Yes.
That's the canonization of Scripture, which gives us 2,000 years later great confidence in what we read has been preserved and is accurate and is complete. Right.
Amen.
So
Amen.
thank you all so much for being here for this incredible episode talking about the 4 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. For everyone listening, you got to go check out their stuff. Check out a lot of the Josh McDowell Ministry curriculum and resources. Check out Matthew Tingblad's resources, his book, and his YouTube channel. If you want to have him come speak, hey, he's a speaker.
Hey.
If you want to get some of our Red Letter Basics resources, we got the book, we got the video course, we got workbooks. Go find it all on the website. Everything is linked in the show notes, in the description. We love you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode. No matter where you're listening and watching the Red Letter Basics podcast, you can support the growth and reach of this ministry. Drop a like, share with a friend, and leave a comment or a review to help the growth of this ministry. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can go over to the website, redletterbasics.com, and learn how to become a ministry partner.